Hello and welcome back to Vandenberg Flash Focus, where we focus on the people and ideas making waves in Washington. Many Americans are thinking about U.S. action against Iran, at least in part, based on how it is affecting prices at the gas pump. The Islamic Republic's decision to close the Strait of Hormuz and the resulting U.S. blockade has impacted a critical choke point for global oil trade and has generated volatility in oil markets. This is why our guest today has repeatedly emphasized one central lesson. The United States must achieve energy dominance to ensure affordable, reliable energy at home, while also leveraging energy as a strategic asset during geopolitical crises like this one. We are thrilled to welcome that guest to Vandenberg Flash Focus today. Richard Goldberg, a senior advisor at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, former member of the White House National Energy Dominance Council, and one of Vandenberg's advisory board members. Today, Richard will help us unpack current energy trends tied to the U.S. campaign against Iran, explain why energy dominance is so vital to national security, and outline what implementing an energy dominance strategy looks like at home and abroad. Richard, thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
To kick off, as I mentioned in the introduction, many Americans are worried about how our campaign in Iran affects energy prices. But before we get to that, help us level set. How is the Iranian campaign going so far from a national security perspective?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the top threats that we have faced from Iran in our national security interests, a potential nuclear weapons program, an actual crossing of the threshold to build a nuclear weapon, having the ability to enrich uranium to weapons grade, having the supply chain up and down, upstream, midstream, downstream to really have an actual nuclear weapons capability. That has largely been destroyed or severely degraded at this point. Iran today cannot enrich uranium, period. Iran today cannot convert raw uranium to enriched uranium. Iran today cannot build centrifuges. Iran today cannot do much anything to actually advance nuclear weapons development. They're nuclear scientists. Most of them, if not all of them, have been assassinated. The research labs where they might be doing weaponization work have been destroyed or degraded as well in university settings and elsewhere. So while we focus a lot on what still has not been achieved, which is important, a stockpile of enriched uranium that remains trapped under tunnels in a place called Isfahan, other underground sites that are not active, like Pickaxe Mountain. You'll hear that talked about deep under a mountain, close to the former facility Natanz, which was destroyed last year during the 12-day war and then Operation Midnight Hammer. Those things need to be resolved still, either by military force or by negotiation, by agreement, or by collapse of the regime and something new. But understand that where we were just a year ago was really sort of the 1 yard line of crossing the nuclear threshold for Iran. They've been sent back not just to the other side of the field, not just to the other 1 yard line, but they're sort of back in the locker room without a coach, without a team, without any players, without a field, without any equipment. So it's a big game changer there. On their missile program, even if you didn't have a nuclear weapons program, you were just concerned about long range missiles and producing hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of missiles capable not just of reaching the Gulf, not just of reaching Israel or parts of Europe, but eventually intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching the United States, continuing to be advanced under cover of a space launch vehicle program. Again, that supply chain up and down the industrial base to support that program lies now in ruins. And that's years and years of work by the regime in Tehran that's now been rolled back. So the inability to quickly enrich uranium to weapons grade level, the inability to produce a nuclear weapon, the inability to expedite and try to build an intercontinental ballistic missile program, gone. They obviously still have missiles, and they have deep missile cities deep underground that we so far have not been able to fully destroy, perhaps aren't able to from air and sea power alone. We think most of those systems are short range in nature. instead of the medium range and intermediate range ballistic missiles that we've seen threaten not just Israel, but the one you saw demonstrated that went towards Diego Garcia during the active military campaign period. But that is why we now have all the focus on the Strait of Hormuz, because we've in some ways destroyed or degraded the long range threats, the most existential threats, and Iran now relies on its short range threat, which is a global threat, even though it is the shortest range capability that they have, and that is their shore, their coastline, the Strait of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, the ability to threaten that with short range missiles, with drones, with small boat swarms. And that is what has brought the Strait of Hormuz effectively to a close. And so the regime has now shifted from clinging to the nuclear threshold as a way to extort the international community and hopefully break through leverage to now finally pulling the trigger on by the way, a threat that's been there for decades. The idea that Iran has just suddenly taken control of the Strait of Hormuz, they've gained control of Hormuz through this campaign. No, they already had the missiles. They already had the drones. They already had the small boats. This was a threat that has been talked about for years. We just didn't do anything about it. We let it continue to metastasize. Can you imagine this threat now with backing of nuclear weapons and long-range missiles and the inability to even try to wrest control of the Strait of Hormuz and restore freedom of navigation? So that is what we're up against right now. That now brings us into full perspective of global energy markets, the global economy, that being now the tool of extortion that the regime is relying upon now that President Trump has taken away their biggest tool of extortion, that being their nuclear missile programs.
Something that our director at Vandenberg, Carrie Filippetti, often emphasizes is preventing Iran from becoming North Korea, right? This idea that North Korea has this tremendous leverage and can kind of extort us because they have that nuclear deterrent. And as you said, now that Iran doesn't have that nuclear deterrent and its ballistic missile deterrent has kind of gone away for the most part, now we're able to really focus in on the Strait of Hormuz, and they can't project power much beyond that.
And to your point, put North Korea on the coastline of an international waterway that is 20% of the world's energy flow, and we would have had a crisis like this a long time ago.
Right. Shifting to the Strait of Hormuz and kind of Iran's attempts to extort the United States and the West, has the impact on energy markets from our campaign been better or worse than expected?
So obviously, I think it's a two-part question of how you sort of unpack it and look at it. We do not have, unless you're the state of California, we don't have real supply problems at this point, the way that Europe and Asia do, and maybe some other continents like Africa do. We simply, because of our evolution over the last 20 years of focusing on the production of American energy, the shale revolution, most importantly, just changing the entire dynamic of the American energy economy and the global energy economy, quite frankly. And then a lot of reversals of policies coming into this new administration. For example, at the end of the Biden administration, we had a ban on the export of liquefied natural gas. No more export terminal licenses to export LNG from the United States. And that was, I mean, can you even imagine a world in which the United States, washed with gas, stopped exporting LNG at a time when Europe is held hostage by Russia and is looking for where can we go to put more pressure on the Russians and get off of Russian gas? Where have they come over the last year? The United States of America. Now Qatari LNG can't get out of the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's supply of gas cut off by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Where are people turning to right now in the spot market? The United States of America. Prices on gas have not mirrored the prices you've seen on oil for the United States. And it's to the tremendous credit, I think, of President Trump of reversing that ban and putting the accelerator pedal down on American natural gas. And that has transformed the gas market globally and certainly in the United States today. On oil, we are also at historic levels now of production and export of American oil, and that's great. However, we're not like Saudi Arabia. We don't have this ability to swing production in the millions of barrels per day. Our producers respond to long-term price signals, and then will potentially put long-term new investment, new production into play if they think there will be value, a year from now, 2 years from, 3 years from now. And so the difference here is that this is a durational disruption in the global market because the Strait of Hormuz physically could reopen at any moment. It's not physically closed, it's under threat. And so shippers aren't moving because of the threats. But if there was a resolution, whether it was a good resolution or a bad resolution, the market future looks at it and says at some point that flow is going to be restored. So the price a year from now, 2 years from now, doesn't reflect what global markets look like today. And so it gets to be a harder incentive structure to get somebody to commit to a lot more production up front now that could potentially help to mitigate the immediate short-term price impact. That said, because of the record production, because of the record export, we are at a place where we don't have supply shortages. Yes, you need to make sure that you have things like the Jones Act waived to be able to get product, especially on the coasts, that might be more susceptible to disruption, that might still be importing from abroad because of their own policies, quite frankly, not because of anything the United States has done. California, by the way, still relying on Middle East oil while attacking American oil and shutting down refineries in their own state. Totally ludicrous, and then blaming President Trump for it. A similar phenomenon happening to a lesser extent in the Northeast blue states as well. So you do need sometimes to have some flexibility in how you transport American energy and foreign energy as well, and get vessels available to make sure cargoes get to where they need and you don't have shortages. But in general, we're not having a supply disruption. We are having at the gas pump right now a reaction to a global commodity that, because of the global shift in supply and demand, has seen an uptick in prices. Now, clearly, the price for West Texas that is still lagging behind what you see at the Brent price as well for what Europe and Asia are paying, but it's still meaningful here to our consumers, to the American people who are showing up at the gas pump and seeing a big price tag. And so in the end, because it is a global commodity, we do have to face that reality. And the president has tried to do, and his energy team has tried to do as much as they can to mitigate that for as long as possible. And quite frankly, he himself has done an incredible job of speaking to the market and managing expectations of the market, where some said that we would already a long time ago be at $150 a barrel of oil or $200 a barrel of oil. That has never happened. We've almost never broken $120. And when we have, it's been just sort of touching it and then coming right back down. Because again, the market understands this is about duration of conflict, duration of disruption, not physically altering the future of flows. And so that's where we're at right now. And so the question would be, what can you do short term other than continue to plow through and get to a point where you reopen the strait on your own terms and bring prices down because the market sees flows restored? That's what Project Freedom was about a few days ago. And when the president talks about potentially bringing back Project Freedom, that is the U.S., by use of naval power, trying to reopen the strait on our own terms, provide zone defense for missile defense and drone defense and swarm boat defense from the U.S. Navy and Air Forces for tankers that would move under fire. If we can actually achieve that, obviously that would be a breakthrough. You take away the leverage of the regime, and the pressure on prices would come down in the short term. Otherwise, you need to continue to find other alternatives that, in the medium and long term, will demonstrate that we are moving away from reliance on the Strait of Hormuz. And those ideas, obviously, are to double down on successes we have seen so far. One thing people don't potentially realize is that you hear in the news that the Strait of Hormuz is clogged up and no tankers are moving out. But the truth is that not everything has been trapped in the Gulf because of the conflict. About a third of oil that traditionally moves through the Strait of Hormuz is getting out. That's been one of the small pressure relief valves so far that I think has contained an even higher price of oil. That's because of an east west pipeline that the Saudis built many years ago that moves oil from the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf over to the Red Sea to load tankers there, and a smaller pipeline that the Emiratis have built that bypasses the Strait of Hormuz and comes out at Fujairah. Both of those right now operating at max capacity. If you double down on that strategy and went, really fast forward with the Saudis, with the Emiratis, with other Gulf partners to do that with oil, gas, petrochemicals as fast as possible, a 2-year lightning speed pipeline construction project with counter drone defense, counter missile defense built in for de-risking of long-term security threats from Iran that might attack the overland routes as well, which they have done a couple times so far to the Saudis with limited success. That would already send a signal to the market to say, hey, we don't care anymore. 2 years from now, all of this oil, all of this gas moves through a pipeline network that's going to be under construction and completed in record time. And the Gulf is going to get behind it, and we're going to have offtake agreements from Europe and Asia to support it. And it's totally economically feasible and it actually desired right now. And it's going to open up all new geopolitical opportunities, normalization pathways, and integration with the region. Think about Israel bringing in to a Saudi pipeline pathway that has to get oil to the Mediterranean that crosses through Israel and then onto Europe. I mean, so many different permutations and linkages to existing infrastructure as well. So I'm actually very bullish on the future of reducing our reliance on the Strait of Hormuz. In the short term, though, this is not going to provide comfort of like, oh, great, so I'm going to have lower prices in 2 years. You're saying like, no, we still have to do in the here and now. We need to de-risk the future. We can't let this regime ever again, if they're going to hang around, continue to do this at any given moment and pull the lever and jack prices back up. So we have to do the long-term fix now, and this is the opportunity to do it. But there is still the short-term need to bring prices down and bring relief. And as they say, sometimes the only way out is through. And I think the president needs to go through right now with Project Freedom Plus and make sure that we open up the Strait of Hormuz on our terms, not on the Iranian regime's terms.
Before moving into a conversation about energy more broadly, I'm kind of curious. We've kind of known that Iran has played the Strait of Hormuz game for a while. I mean, you mentioned earlier that it's been 47 years that they've kind of had this in their back pocket. Since we've known that they've had the ability to do this or have threatened it, why hadn't we built these other pipelines or these other alternatives before now?
It's a great question. I mean, the Saudis did this, many years ago because of the fear of something like this happening during the Iran-Iraq war. And so they are already de-risking. By the way, there are Bloomberg reports out there that you can look up that actually say the Saudis have not lost money on this so far, that when you account for the price of oil going up and what they've been able to go through the pipelines with at max capacity, they're almost breaking even compared to where they were completely reliant on the Strait of Hormuz, shipping their oil at lower prices, which is mind-boggling to think about in the current environment. So it actually incentivizes, I think, additional pipeline construction and basically having a proof of concept. I think we took for granted that this might not ever actually come to fruition. In the same way, I think many people in Washington fell into this conventional way of thinking of, Iran isn't really going to get a nuclear weapon. They're not really going to get an ICBM. Maybe they're just extorting us. Maybe they just like the leverage that trying or having a program has over us and drives us crazy to give them money or to give them concessions. And I think very few people really, put the credibility. I obviously for FDD, for others, calling attention to this for many, many years, not in that camp. But a lot of Washington on a bipartisan level, I think, sort of just got very used to an Iran at a certain threat level and just figured, we can manage that threat. We can buy off that threat. The Iran nuclear deal itself was an extortion racket to try to just buy off the threat. and pay the racket through sanctions relief. I think what this has proven is that those eras of trying to buy off the threat, of just trying to manage it, trying to ignore it, trying to rationalize it, allowed it to continue to metastasize to a point where here we are. And all I can think about is, can you imagine if this regime had exercised its effective control over the strait, which has always been there, at a time when they actually had an ICBM, when they actually had already crossed the nuclear threshold, or at a time of China's choosing in the future when they wanted to create some sort of a crisis for global markets to distract us from what they wanted to do, like an invasion of Taiwan or something like that. So it is a real question. However, this is now a reality. We have to look forward. We have to think of what we can do constructively now, and I think this is the moment to partner. I call it the Aram Express. Aramco, Saudi Aramco, actually started. The reason why it's called that is the Arabian American Oil Company. Historic reasons, you can go look it up. Pretty cool story. The United States and Saudi Arabia, partnering there on discovering oil. Aram Express, an Arabian American partnership on a pipeline consortium to really remake the Middle East and how energy flows to the world from there to reduce or eliminate our reliance on the Strait of Hormuz would be a really important project right now. But the last thing I'll say is just globally here, going back to your first question, it is important to recognize that everyone is calling the United States right now. Long-term contracts are being entered into for American energy, American oil, American LNG. This is not going to go away. We are, already we were in a position of American energy dominance. That is now on steroids after this conflict, where Asian markets, European markets are all looking to us, are all having conversations with us. And also put into perspective here what is happening in Venezuela. I don't think you can pull these things apart. It's a global market. And yes, there's different kinds of crude and different refineries have to adjust to different blends and light and heavy and all that. But understand that we now, at least for now, have effective control, it would seem, over the world's largest oil reserves in Venezuela. That's huge. With American companies who a few months ago said we'd never go in there, it's too risky, too dangerous, now saying, of course, we have to go in there, we are going in there. And we're seeing now the uptick in production and export coming out of Venezuela as the oil industry is getting rebuilt with American support. That is also a trajectory that the market is seeing, and it's one that will fall under, at least for now, the umbrella of the United States.
It seems to me that this campaign has really uncovered a fact that energy policy is a really underappreciated asset of a strong U.S. national security policy and grand strategy more broadly. In your view, why does energy play such a critical role in national security? And how do you envision the United States using energy as a geopolitical tool moving forward?
Well, energy is everything. You can't run your economy without energy. You can't live your life without energy. Energy is the lifeblood of your country, and so energy policy as security policy is long overdue to be recognized as an intrinsic fact. And so I think having a National Energy Dominance Council established in the White House. I don't really care whether you're a Democrat and you believe in the Green New Deal and climate change and all that, or you're a Republican and you're focused on oil and gas and baseload energy and getting off of unreliable, expensive renewables. You should understand that energy is inherently part of our national security. And there should have always been an energy policy council like the National Security Council at the White House to have that flexibility to work very quickly on domestic needs, but also serve to support national security needs abroad. And that's what's happening today from the National Energy Dominance Council. You've seen their leadership going to Venezuela. You've seen their leadership, Secretary Burgum, weighing in on Iran and other issues in Europe, helping European markets get more American gas and build out their regasification infrastructure to receive American LNG. All of the Alaska LNG pipeline project to serve the Indo-Pacific market long term with an eye towards China and what they might want to do there to our partners. All of that is so inherent in our energy policy and our national security policy. It's long overdue to recognize that. I'll add one other big piece here. If that alone wasn't it, the fact that you could say to yourself, wow, if we didn't have a pro natural gas, a pro LNG policy, we wouldn't be able to help Europe get off of Russian gas and understand the integration of energy policy here at home with geopolitics abroad. That's a great example. If you're a Democrat who hated natural gas and supported the Biden LNG export ban, I hope you've reflected in your support for Ukraine on what that ban would have meant today in our ability to help Eastern and Central Europe get off of Russian gas in an accelerated fashion, put more pressure on Vladimir Putin, right? So that's one piece of it, the geopolitics there, and we could talk about it in the context of Iran, Venezuela, etc. That's the traditional geopolitical view, I think, that's now become obvious to people and why energy is so important. Here's one that still hasn't sunk in, and that has to do with artificial intelligence. It's another big piece, another big mandate of the National Energy Dominance Council. On day one, the President of the United States, January 20th, 2025, issued an executive order declaring an energy emergency in the United States. Now, everybody scratched their head, right? Because I just told you about how we're abundant in oil, the shale revolution changing the world. We're abundant in gas. We're awash, now feeding the world with our LNG. What are you talking about, Rich? What energy emergency could the president be declaring? And that had to do with electricity, with our baseload energy, with our ability to power the United States long term. Our grid, because of our over-reliance on renewables, on especially wind and solar, on what we call unreliable, high-cost, intermittent sources of energy, has destabilized the grid alongside the constant attack, both from Democratic administrations and from blue state regulations, against coal and shutting down coal power plants, against oil. We talked about California, against gas, against nuclear for so many years, as we saw in Europe here too. This has caused enormous strain on the grid at a time when we actually need to be exponentially adding power to the grid to keep up with the demand that artificial intelligence knowledge centers, they call them data centers, you should call them knowledge centers, and I'll tell you why, that they demand so much power that we need to add to the grid, that if we were continuing to move down a path of just wind and solar, you would be in a position that Spain was in, last year, if you remember, when they had a catastrophic event on their grid because of an over-reliance on renewable power. If we don't get back into baseload, if we don't save coal power plants from shutting down, we don't start adding instead of subtracting from our baseload energy, we will not just be able to keep our grid resilient today, we will never be able to keep up with the power demand that is needed to unlock the next and then the next and then the next algorithm of artificial intelligence. While the Chinese can build a coal power plant a week, can build nuclear left and right, can dam any river with no environmental regulation, can do all those things. They can get the New York Times to report that they're the leaders in wind or solar. Sure, fine, whatever. That's not how they are powering their economy. That's not how they're powering the race to achieve the next algorithm of artificial intelligence and win the AI arms race. It's with baseload energy. And so we need here in the United States to understand that if we fall back, if we don't have the power available here, you're not just going to be dealing with blackouts and brownouts like the state of California has for so many years, which itself is a big problem. We will also lose the century to China. The CCP will have the power to win the AI arms race, and we will not. And I think the human mind can't even get around what that even means, because we still can't really get our minds around what it means to have that last algorithm when the software writes the software, and the applications that we'll have in national security and defense and all of that. We want to be the one that gets there first, and we want the world using our tech stack when it happens. And so that's the national emergency. It's getting more power onto the grid by adding baseload, not subtracting baseload. And so if there's one other piece there for people to latch onto, the connection between energy and national security, and domestic policy and its integration to our national security, it's in the power we need for AI.
It's taken too long for me to ask you this officially. I've buried the lead a bit, but could you explain exactly what you mean when you refer to an energy dominant strategy? What are the objectives of such a strategy, and how is this kind of distinct than past Democrat and Republican administrations?
Yeah, I would say there's probably four elements to it. One is you want to be able to ensure you have low cost, reliable energy for your economy. Number one, that's something that was trending in a very bad direction for all the reasons we just talked about. You want to make sure that if something happens in the world that disrupts supply, you don't have a supply disruption, that in that case, you're sort of energy independent. Check. We're seeing that in real time, except for maybe the state of California with what's going on with the Strait of Hormuz. You want to be able to not just be that energy independent actor that can withstand supply disruptions, you also want to be so abundant in energy that you can offer your energy to partners and allies in times when they're in crisis, what is happening right now, or to induce them to come over to your supply chain instead of an adversary supply chain, to therefore help your own geopolitics, your own foreign policy and national security strategy, what we are seeing play out in Europe, unhooking from Russian gas onto American gas, from Russian oil onto American oil, etc. And then the last piece, which is the part that I think is newer to most Americans, is you have enough energy to power the victory in the AI arms race. Because for the first time in history, we always used to say knowledge is power. Now power is knowledge. And that means we have to have the policies to make sure we can extract that knowledge and have enough power to get there.
So you served on the National Energy Dominance Council last year. Could you explain a little bit what the council's mission is, how it operates, and what actions it's taken or is expected to take?
Yeah, everything I just talked about is the council's mission, plus mining and minerals and making sure that we get our critical minerals out from under the thumb of the CCP, sort of taking back the periodic table across the supply chain, upstream, especially in rare earth, but also other critical minerals where China controls the market. Midstream, we talk about processing, refining, metal making, and then having enough supply for downstream in our manufacturing sector, advanced manufacturing, our auto sector, and of course our defense sector. And so you've seen a lot of that play out. That all started in the National Energy Dominance Council. But the Energy Dominance Council, credit to President Trump, Secretary of the Interior Burgum, Secretary of Energy Chris Wright, for their vision and saying this is a moment because of the national emergency, because of the importance of energy inside national security, to have a dedicated tiger team inside the White House, a council that could be project oriented and say, how do we go Trump speed on oil? How do we go Trump speed on gas? How do we go Trump speed on saving coal and bringing it back as a baseload energy source, both the United States and exported to partners? And how do we make sure we have enough power on the grid so that it's resilient, but also is adding the power that we need to power the AI revolution? And finally, how do we make sure that China is not able to win the century because of its control over the periodic table? What do we need to do to make mining great again in America, and also partner around the world with allies for supply chains that may not be available in the United States? All of that's within the mandate, and I think if you look at the record, it's pretty breathtaking what they've been able to accomplish in just over a year.
I'd love to ask about how energy dominance works with adversaries and allies. Kind of first, what I'll ask is, how do sanctions regimes against the Islamic Republic and Russia play into an energy dominance strategy? And then maybe second, what does energy dominance look like in terms of working with partners and allies?
Yeah, great question. Goes back to one of my defined parameters for energy dominance. So this would be, I think, number 3 there, which is to be so abundant that you can offer energy to your allies and partners in moments of crisis and also to change the dynamic of geopolitics. And so your question in both sets are sort of two sides of the coin there for the same challenge that if we are able to have the right policies, we can meet. And so in the context of, let's say, Russia, right? We're not getting the result we want. We're not seeing a halt to the war. Putin doesn't seem to be feeling pain from a sanctions policy that looks like Swiss cheese that was created between the Biden administration and the European Union by committee, where we could only go so far as leaders in Brussels or Berlin were comfortable going. And so we never actually dropped the hammer on Russian oil the way we could. We never actually dropped the hammer on Russian gas the way we could with our sanctions because we were concerned about what would happen in the global market, what would happen to European countries that are over reliant on Russian oil and gas. Enter the United States in this administration, and we say, wow, what is energy dominance? It's being able to go to every one of these countries and say, this is your record since the invasion of Ukraine. This is how much you're still importing from Russia. This is how much you are financing the conflict, that you are haranguing, and going to the United States and saying you're not doing enough to bring to a close. Tell you what, our policies right now are such that we are going to be making more and more oil and gas to sell to you. So here are the companies that are doing it. Here's how you get into offtake from the United States. Go have these conversations, and we want to see you accelerate your plan to get out from under Russian oil and gas as quickly as possible. Oh, you need help with infrastructure to regasify the American LNG that's coming in? Here are the American companies who do this. Go talk to them, start working on it because we want this happening in the next year. We want this happening yesterday. And it's happening. It's happening. There's not a green transition going on in Europe right now. There's a red, white, and blue transition going on in energy in Europe right now, from Greece on up through the vertical corridor, with more potentially happening east to west as we look at the potential of IMEC. And I think that on steroids, we talked about the pipeline consortium, the Iran Express, because of what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz. This is the time to push, fast forward on IMEC and really integrate this east-west, not just north-south in Europe. And I think that's going to happen very quickly. And so you have flexibility in your sanctions policies. You can start pushing in a way you haven't pushed on your adversaries to squeeze them off of their ability to buy Iranian oil, for example, or Russian oil or gas, and be able to enter the market in that way. You can also obviously think about energy to induce peace. A great example, Armenia and Azerbaijan, a conflict that had been going on for years. Donald Trump enters, talks to all the parties, says, hey, we are energy dominant. We are looking for partnerships, whether it's in oil and gas, whether it's in pipelines, or maybe in critical minerals. A lot of countries start perking up their ears. Oh, you would partner with us on critical minerals? Well, we think we have a lot of minerals. We're not sure. Could the U.S. Geological Survey come in and map and take a look at what we have? And if you like it, be part of the global supply chain ex-China that you're trying to build. Only we're going to get a lot of investment in our country and partner with the United States. Wow, this is exciting. Yeah, okay, we could do this. We could have a peace agreement that's really underneath the hood, a lot of it being cooperation with the United States on energy. So I think that model can be replicated in so many places in the world. And then the last piece is this. I also think it starts driving us by thinking much more practically, pragmatically, and smartly about true foreign policy, true grand strategy. How do the pieces fit together? Once you start thinking about it as a global market, as a global supply chain, what each country brings to the table, where China has been doing this for years through the Belt and Road Initiative. They have been thinking like this strategically as you look at what they've been doing inroads in Latin America for so many years, what they do in Africa, what they do in Central Asia. That's always on their mind. And we're very different because we lead with our values. We have morals. We have ethics. We're not just trying to pillage a country, pile on debt for the future and just take natural resources and move on. That is what the CCP does. But it doesn't mean that we can't be thinking in a way that actually is driven by grand strategy. Yes, we want to make sure that Latin America, the Western Hemisphere, does not come under the influence of the Communist Chinese Party. We want to make sure it has American values, Western values. But we can also say, wow, look at the pieces that fit together in the energy market. If Venezuela and Guyana and Brazil and Argentina, all these actors start coming together and under a U.S. leadership and a U.S. umbrella, and we box out the Chinese, think of what starts happening to our power in the world, our projection of power, our economic power, and our national security. All of that can fit together. And so I think having this energy lens for our national security and foreign policy really helps us make better decisions and better strategy.
I guess my final question on that is, what should our viewers be and our listeners be on the lookout for in the short term and medium term from the Trump administration in terms of securing energy dominance?
Yeah, it's a great question. Listen, I think the AI infrastructure build out remains the biggest challenge that goes understated on a daily basis. I think that being able, and we saw this a little bit with a recent breakthrough the administration had on the mid-Atlantic coast with one of the big utilities there, where what's happening is that, everybody sort of is staring at each other, and nobody wants to make a move. If you're a real estate developer that needs land, but you can't get the utility to promise you that you're going to have power availability, and you can't get the person who's supposed to buy the power to make the commitment to buy power so that you can get the land because the bank isn't sure the power will be there, so they can't get financing. Everybody's staring at each other, and that's preventing a lot of the biggest AI infrastructure build out to have the land developed, to have the power available to then power the most advanced hyperscaling AI data centers or knowledge centers. Being able to focus on this issue to guarantee that we have that we will have the power generation and transmission availability to power all those hyperscalers to get to the power level that we need, the demand level that we need, is going to be crucial for the century. Right now, we're very focused on the Strait of Hormuz. We're focused on basics on oil and gas and markets. All that's really important. We got to push forward on that. We got to address national security threats like the state of California that relies on the Middle East instead of relying on American energy. But I think I expect a lot more to come out of the administration still in breaking through some of these barriers that exist, quite frankly, at a state and local level, but doing so with federal cooperation and stakeholder management to make sure we are staying on track to beat China in the AI arms race.
Rich, throughout the conversation, you've said that energy is power, power is knowledge, knowledge is power. So I'm sure our listeners feel more energized and powerful now that you've given us this knowledge on energy dominance. So thank you so much for joining Flash Focus today.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Flash Focus is a production of the Vandenberg Coalition. To connect and stay up to date on our work, follow our account on X @VandenbergCo or visit www.vandenbergcoalition.org to learn more and subscribe to our weekly newsletter on foreign policy and national security beyond the water's edge. Until next time, I'm Ethan Minkoff, and this is Vandenberg Flash Focus.